Hi, Doug. Good morning, and thank you very much for being here with us.
Good morning, Emanuele. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So, for the few that don't know you yet, Doug has been a pioneer, a real pioneer into the self-management movement, starting from his experience as a controller in Morningstar. And he has been a bestseller author with books about going beyond empowerment and the real application of self-management. So we are very glad to have Doug here to explore a bit about the story of Morningstar, his experience with it, but also the connections about the story and the practices at Morningstar and what we are seeing unfolding from our group and from its Randan-Hei model. So Doug, again, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us. As you know, in this series of interviews called the EEEO conversations, so the entrepreneurial ecosystem enabling organizations conversations, what we are trying to do is to explore a number of connections, number of similarities, a number of common dynamics between what IRE is doing with the Randan-Hei model and actually what other organizations have been doing in different countries from different perspectives with different names. We really believe that we are at the tipping point of a new way of organizing, and we want to have this conversation to explore it, explore these connections. So before starting with this exploration, I would kindly ask you if you could tell us a couple of words about yourself, about your role at Morningstar, and actually who is Morningstar and why you believe Morningstar is so relevant in this conversation.
Great. Thanks, Emanuele. Morningstar's name comes from the last sentence of a very famous book here in the United States called Walden Pond by Henry David Thoreau. And the very last sentence of the book says, "The sun is but a morning star." And we have a very visionary founder named Chris Ruffer, and to him that sentence meant a vision of beautiful, aesthetic, perfect results. And so that has been his guiding star for the last 50 years, since 1970, when he started the Morningstar Trucking Company, and that evolved into the company that is Morningstar today. And so I joined him in the early 1980s. We started a company before Morningstar. And I joined him as the financial controller at that company. I was just out of college, and we started that company as a high-tech food processor based here in Northern California. It was quite successful. Financially, we grew to $100 million or so US. Was very successful from a superficial financial standpoint, but we always had the feeling that we weren't organized as well as we could be, because in those days we simply defaulted to traditional command and control. So we had a traditional pyramid structure. Our founder was at the top as a managing partner. We had a layer of managers, of whom I was one. We had a production manager, quality manager, distribution manager, marketing manager, and all the rest. And then we had a layer of supervisors, and their job was to essentially operate the factory and make sure that production ran smoothly. And then we had a layer of coordinators, and then we had everyone else who did the actual work. And the challenge we found was that no matter where a conflict or a dispute or a problem or a clash of ideas occurred anywhere in the pyramid. It always went straight to the top because we had an open door policy. This was very unproductive and costly and frustrating. And then we began to notice things. So one of the things we noticed was that as people drive into work, every one of those human beings is already a manager in his or her own personal life. So every one of those human beings is already deciding who to date, who to marry, where to go to college, what to do for a living, whether to buy a house or a car or have children. Life-altering, life-changing decisions. Somehow they're making all these gigantic decisions without a boss, which begs the question, if people know what to do at work and how to do it, why would they need a boss? And then we had another insight. Our founder was signing checks one day. The way checks were created was that a supervisor would order a machine or a part, issue in a purchase order. Then we would receive the machine, have a receipt, and then an invoice would arrive in the mail, and a clerk would match all those pieces up and create a check and produce a stack of checks for our founder to sign. And one day he was signing checks. He came to one check for a particular pump ordered by a mechanic supervisor. And he said, "Why am I signing these checks? I'm adding zero value to the process. A purchase order is a legal contract. It's a legally binding liability. If I don't sign the check, I will be sued. I'm adding no value, in fact, negative value, because it's taking me away from strategic work that I should be doing." So he brought the stack of checks down to my desk. He plopped them on my desk and said, "You sign the checks from now on, so I can be free to do the work I'm here to do." And I said, "Sure, that's great." So we started collecting these insights. And we also collected insights about giving people real-time feedback so they could play the game of work and turn work into a game, and how they became more engaged and energized by that. So finally, in the late 1980s, our founder, Chris, left to start a new venture called Morningstar, and I followed him there in early 1990. And we were working out of a tiny little farmhouse on a dusty canal bank in Northern California. And we were working 100-hour weeks trying to build this state-of-the-art food processing facility called Morningstar. And one day our founder walked into the farmhouse and said, "I'd like to have a meeting of the colleagues and talk about how to organize." And we said, "Sure." So we met at night in a little construction trailer, and we sat around in a circle on, steel folding chairs facing each other. And he handed out a document called the Morningstar Team Principles, and it boiled down to two simple principles. Number one, don't use force against other human beings. Number two, keep your commitments to other human beings. And we discussed and debated these principles for a couple of hours, and finally realized that these principles are the foundation of all law everywhere in the world. And we had no objection to them. They made perfect sense. They were self-evident. And so we adopted them as pretty much the entire governance of the enterprise. And when we walked out of the trailer, we were a self-managed enterprise. This was March of 1990. And so we had a lot of work to do. So we had to hire hundreds of employees to operate the factory and drive the trucks. We had hundreds of contractors on the job site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, constructing, fabricating, and welding. We had vital equipment arriving on ocean cargo freighters coming from Parma, Italy, out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, waiting to go through the Panama Canal. And we had thousands of hectares, acres of tomatoes coming up out of the ground, up and down the state of California. But finally on July 16th of 1990, we turned on the factory, and we ended up producing 90 million pounds, about 45 million kilograms of industrial tomato concentrate for the world market, and basically changed the cost structure of our entire industry overnight. And we did it without a single human boss. no bosses of others, no managers of others, no supervisors of others, no titles, zero command authority. And we found that that self-management worked very well for us in allowing an adaptive organization, and we have never deviated from our two simple principles. They are the most fundamental principles of human interaction. If you imagine a world where no one used force against other human beings, we wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on our doors. And of course, we understand that's not reality, but that's not the point. The point is, the closer we approach that ideal state, the more space we open up for human happiness, harmony, and prosperity. What if everyone did what they said they were going to do? What if everyone kept the commitments they make to each other? What an amazing world that would be to live in. Of course, we know that's not realistic either. But again, that's not the point. The point is, the closer we approach that ideal state, the better off we are as human beings. And by the way, commitment keeping has absolute, quantifiable, measurable economic and financial value for individual human beings and for organizations. So we grew from one factory, we added another factory, and then another factory. We expanded operations up and down the supply chain toward customers across North America, toward the supply in terms of farming, harvesting, transplanting, and trucking. We became the largest tomato processor in the world, nearly $1 billion company. Today, I believe everyone in North America has eaten our product, and millions more around the world. And we have never deviated from our core principles, which allow us to manage enormous complexity with great simplicity.
Let me stop you here. So this is really an amazing story, a story in which you have an organization starting from scratch, betting on strong principles, two strong principles, becoming a leader into the manufacturing space. So we are not talking about digital, we are not talking about knowledge, not only, we are talking about production, we are talking about hundreds, actually thousands of people during the season, and two strong principles guiding action. So let me do one step back. I think the story started decades ago, but specifically right now, we are seeing on one side technology having a disruptive effect on society, on our expectations as consumers, on our interactions, social media, mobile phones, and so on. On the other side, we have a huge disruption due to the uncertainty that we are living both at a political level, but at the societal level as well, climate change. All of this is exposing organizations to decreasing levels of productivity. You mentioned already engagement, actually lack of engagement, and I must say also a very strong inability of organizations to keep up with this change, with these mounting pressures in terms of business models, not just in terms of operations. Why the two principles that you just described are so important decades ago, but also now. Why they are important, why it's important not to use force, why it's important to let people decide their commitments into this complex, uncertain, volatile moment of history.
Yeah, thank you, Emanuele. Why it's important is that the pace of change, particularly technological change, but also social and generational change, is outpacing the ability of humans and organizations to absorb the change. It's moving too fast. And so what that's creating is extraordinarily high levels of anxiety. And anxiety is part of the human condition. We will never be free from anxiety. It will always be with us. But it's the job of every human being to manage his or her anxiety in such a way that they are energized by it and can use it in a positive, constructive way, and do not become paralyzed by it, so that it becomes a destructive force. Anxiety is pure energy, and it will either be released in constructive or destructive ways. And we see plenty of examples of both of those in the world today. So we have to create adaptive organizations that give people a sense of agency and autonomy where they can be liberated to reach their potential in whatever way they define that subjectively, and to do their best work, and to freely associate with requests from others, which are the very basis of commitments, and where they can express their true creativity to the utmost of their ability, if that's their choice. So if we can start to think of humans as human beings instead of human resources, if we can abandon the dehumanizing language of HR and stop talking about man hours as if women don't exist, and head count as if people don't have bodies, and direct reports as if people are file folders, and talk about human beings in language that's elevating, where we are addressing the deeper issues of leadership, meaning, purpose, belonging, and getting away from thinking of people as mechanistic cogs in some kind of an economic machine, then we have a fighting chance of transcending our current anxiety-producing state and allowing people to really become creative, engaged, and excited about work once again. Just a few thoughts.
No, I think they're very powerful thoughts. And while you were speaking, actually another implication came to mind. I would say ingenuity. So the possibility, and to me, this is not obvious, the possibilities of every human being, as you said, not resource, to add value in a creative way, even in production. I think Morningstar is demonstrating this very, very well. I often hear, this idea that, okay, but you are not a knowledge worker. At the end, you have physical work. This is a job that doesn't require any thinking. So at the end, you cannot be engaged. It's by design like that. I think that what you did at Morningstar demonstrates the opposite. And this topic is very central to Humanocracy, the new book from Gary Hamel. So this idea that it's around responsibility as organizations to leave this space, to build the enabling platform for every single human being to add value, to be creative, to bring passion to work. Is it what you see as well as an implication of the structure that Morningstar decided to have?
Yeah, it's absolutely an artifact of the structure, and allowing people to self-organize and connect via contract and commitment is a form of structure. It's a dynamic form of structure, and one in which people engage themselves as free agents in the ecosystem. But yeah, absolutely, the passion, the engagement, the creativity is a direct result of that. And it is flowing through the entire enterprise. So we have lots of year-round people who have a great deal of responsibility. So we have a number of technicians, electromechanics, and others. Many of these technicians have only a high school education, perhaps a couple of years of community college, but they are specialists in their fields, and they're some of the best specialists in the world at what they do in a very narrow specialty. And so they're compensated like Harvard, Stanford, Yale graduates, Ivy League graduates. They're some of the best paid people in their communities, because they are utmost professionals at what they do. So what we've done in that domain is to obliterate the dichotomy between blue collar workers and white collar workers. We have no collar workers. Everyone in the enterprise is considered a professional. The person who cleans the toilets is a professional. And we respect the voice of each and every human being in the environment. And that's why self-management works. Everyone has a voice in matters that affect them. So some of these mechanics are personally responsible for 8, 12, 15 plus millions US dollars of equipment, for strategy, for operations, for tactics, for personnel, for maintenance. Every aspect of that equipment, they have as much or more responsibility than many small company CEOs. And they are self-managers and totally responsible as professionals for that part of the factory. The seasonal cohort are equally professional. I just concluded a series of focus group interviews with a number of seasonal colleagues throughout different parts of the organization. And they absolutely feel like they have agency, autonomy, freedom to suggest improvements, to implement improvements, to innovate, to lead. In the future, all jobs are going to be leadership jobs. In the future, at some point, everything that can be automated will be automated. So with the confluence of those two trends, we have to create organizations and environments where people are free to innovate and free to lead. And that's what we have now. We have some of our technicians, one of our technicians theorized a better way to handle materials, sketched out some engineering diagrams, came up with an idea, sold it to stakeholders who would be affected, found some budget, implemented a capital project, saved millions of dollars. So those opportunities are available to every single person in this environment. That's why it's successful.
Great, really great. Just to build the connection with higher really has this idea of a micro enterprise that is very much, let's say, an associate in Morningstar. So at the end, it's sort of a semi-autonomous entity, self-managed, with lots of freedom, basically to decide what to do, to build its own strategy, not just to operate, but to pick the direction. There is one difference, though. The basic entity for Morningstar is in the individual, at the best of my understanding, at least. For Hire, it's a group of individuals, a small group, 8, 10 people. Any idea why is this? Is this connected to the industry, to your supply chain, or to other reasons? And then we'll talk a bit about the network between individuals. But staying for now at the level of the basic unit, why of this difference? Why you thought about not focusing on teams so much, but focusing on empowering, structurally, intrinsically empowering individuals to act?
Right. So I would say that at both Hire and Morningstar, we do think about both individuals and teams and groups. We came at self-management 30 years ago from the standpoint of principles. So if you believe in principles, and we do, then principles are the North Star that guide you and that shape your thinking, that shape your culture, shape your systems, and how you approach everything. So our principles are very much human-centric and individual-centric. We simply put a stake in the ground and adopted these two principles: don't use force, keep commitments. We think they're as fundamental to human beings and human interaction as gravity is to physics. They're the most important principles of human interactivity. And so we made those central, and we expect individuals to subscribe to these principles and support them. Now, not everyone does at all times, of course, but the idea of a principle is that to the degree we align our behavior with these principles, we are better off, relatively better off. And to the degree we ignore these principles, we are relatively worse off. And so if I choose to abide by the laws of gravity, I will be relatively safer. If I choose to ignore the law of gravity and I step off a tall building, I will be relatively less safe. So we just expect people to align as best they can with these principles, and it is somewhat individualistic. Teams are concepts, organizations are concepts, companies are concepts, business units are concepts. In some ways, countries are concepts. Concepts can't take actions, and concepts can't make decisions. Only human beings can do those things. And if I delegate my decision making to a computer algorithm or AI or the flip of a coin, I'm still a human being undertaking that decision. So teams are great. Teamwork is great. We have teams, we have business units at Morningstar. And so it's not that we've abandoned those concepts, but they are merely concepts. And teams are composed of individual human beings. And so that's the starting point for us. And then we wrap the concepts around the individuals because concepts can influence thinking and action. They can shape the way that people think and act. They can shape the culture. So principles, individuals, and then teams, and then the company, and then the world. That's how kind of the progression for us. Hire is a little different, you know, but I would say this. Jean Ramin, the CEO of Hire, reads about Immanuel Kant, the 19th century German philosopher, who wrote compellingly about free will. And in Immanuel Kant's world, human beings are the meaning. They are the object. They are the raison d'etre. They're the reason we exist. They're not a means to an end. They are the end themselves. And Jean Ramin believes that completely. Well, that has to do with individual human beings. So Hire's got all the micro enterprises, which is awesome and great. But those are made up of individual human beings, each of whom has free will, as Jean Ramin believes. And each of those persons is an individual agent contributing their energy to the success of their respective micro enterprises.
And of course, individuals are connected. So what you did at Morningstar is building this concept, as you said, of a clue. The clue, and I will ask you to explain what is that, is really the connection, the lines connecting people into this flow into this flow of value. So why you thought about clues, how do they work, and how do they build these networks of people in the organization, into the value creation chain?
Right. So the colleague letter of understanding was proposed in 1996 by our founder, and it was a direct result of realizing that as we doubled in size from one factory to two factory, and these factories were separated by a significant geographic distance, our founder realized that we needed a coordination mechanism to better organize our team activities and to better help individuals understand the capabilities and capacities of their fellow team members, irrespective of geographic location. So we ran for 6 years without a colleague letter of understanding. We ran for 6 years from 1990 to 1996 with just our two principals. And that was pretty much the entire governance of the enterprise. We had a process for gaining agreement to resolve differences of opinion. That was a mechanism that was available to anyone, but the two principals provided the governance of the enterprise and still do. But the colleague letter of understanding was simply a tool. We rolled it out in 2006. In the beginning, it was a paper contract, just a contract like any other written contract by and between peers. It had very simple elements. It was the who, what, why, when, where, and how of work. In addition to some ancillary information like what are your goals, short-term and long-term, how will you handle proprietary information, what are your expectations for compensation, some other elements like that. But basically it was, what is my purpose? That's the starting point. We called it a personal commercial mission. Why are you here? What does excellence look like in your role here? How does what you do support the overall mission, vision, values, and principles of the enterprise? And we asked people to think that through and derive a mission that resonated with them as individual contributors, but also with the people with whom they work most closely. So we start with purpose, personal commercial mission, then we get into the content of one's work. So what are the processes for which one agrees to be personally accountable? And along with that, what are the decision rights? What is the scope and quantum of one's decision-making authority with respect to each process for which one has agreed to be accountable? Or are you the decision maker? Are you making recommendations to another decision maker? Do you need input from others prior to making a decision? Are you a decision maker when the regular decision maker goes on vacation? What is the exact definition of your decision-making authority in this enterprise for each process for which you're accountable? And that's a huge area in which many companies are not particularly competent, but it's a huge opportunity for clarity, accountability, and transparency. And so then who do you connect to? Most people connect to somewhere between 7 and 12 fellow colleagues. We have a kind of a Dunbarian sort of breakdown in understanding complex work relationships when we get past 25 or so. So very few people are connected to more than 20 or 25 people. But people are free to connect with whoever they wish to connect with as independent agents with agency and autonomy. So people negotiate these colleague letters of understanding, the who, what, why, when, and where of work. And these are enforceable contracts. These are the foundations for accountability. There's no such thing as accountability without commitment underlying the accountability, and that's what these agreements provide in a long-term sense, kind of a long-term recurring continuous sense. Of course, there are shorter-term commitments that are not rolled into a colleague letter of understanding, which are equally important, but these are kind of the ongoing systemic long-term commitments that people make to the enterprise. Now, they are dynamic. They can be renegotiated and reconfigured at any time, not unilaterally, but in conjunction with one's peers. But these are the kind of recurring long-term commitments that people make, and these are promises, and they are the foundation of accountability in the enterprise.
I see a strong connection to IRE again. As you know, IRE recently launched what they call EMC. And an EMC at the end, it's a way to connect the micro enterprises. So they're smaller unit based on a contract. So based on an agreement that describes what I can bring in terms of services, what I expect in terms of returns, and that it's voluntary. So at the end, it's every micro enterprise that wants to participate and wants to collaborate. So this is a way, I guess, to protect the independence and autonomy of every entity, every unity, but at the same time to structurally facilitate collaboration and alignment. So again, even if a slightly different level, this has the same goals of what is happening in higher. But there is another level you were touching on, and it's the, let's say, I would call it the direction, the strategy. So at the end, you have many actors, whether individuals or teams or micro enterprises. You have a network of connections, but then at some point you want to steer the boat. At the end, you want to invest on something instead of something else. And IRE here has a couple of artifacts. One is the EMC, the other one is the industry platform. So at the end, it's a vehicle for investment and for raising the attention of micro enterprises on areas that requires collaboration. How does that happen in Morningstar? So at the end, what's the tool, the way for Chris or for the leadership, let's say, to raise attention and to energize colleagues to focus on some specific aspect?
Right. So I alluded to the idea of decision rights earlier, and large-scale strategic decision rights are just another class of decision rights, which belong to someone. And when we think about allocating decision rights, the question is always who is the best person or persons to make a particular decision, and how should that decision be made. So it just so happens that in our case, most large-scale strategic decisions and decision rights belong to our founder, who knows more about the industry than probably any other person in the world. Studies it constantly and is completely equipped and prepared to make any large-scale acquisition or start a new factory or anything to do with strategy. But he does something very important, and that is to communicate the strategy in advance with plenty of warning, and just share the vision and invite feedback in an open conversation, invite questions, concerns, dialogue and discussion, and all that feedback is perfectly willing to incorporate that into the decision-making process. What I've experienced is that this is very enthusing and exciting and energizing and engaging. It's great. One of the jobs of a leader is to share a compelling vision of a desired future state, while at the same time being very realistic about current constraints and opportunities and morale and culture and one's own internal emotional state, as well as what's going on with people in the organization, and understanding political realities and climate realities and environmental and all the other regulatory issues that we have to deal with. So it's balancing the polarity of realism and vision, and then communicating that in a compelling way that's invitational and not impositional, and it invites people to join on a vision, a voyage of discovery. That's what I've experienced at Morningstar.
That's a big responsibility.
Starts with a large dose of. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, didn't want to interrupt. I was just saying that's a big responsibility.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a huge responsibility, but it's the responsibility of leadership, and it also includes a large dose of courage, because to step into an unknown future with a vision and a plan, and realizing that we're surrounded with anxiety and ambiguity, and accelerating technological and social change is a big deal. And that courage also needs to be balanced with a gigantic dose of ethics, which is all about other people. You know, courage is about your inner will. Ethics is about caring, kindness, compassion, support, and nurturing for other people, and it's largely about coaching and mentoring. And I would encourage anyone to read my friend Peter Kestenbaum's books on balancing freedom and accountability at work, and on leadership, the inner side of greatness, which is all about, you know, inviting people into that compelling future state.
And here I see another connection, because Chris, on top of building the vision and communicating it, to my understanding, has been holding the space also for other people, the rest of the organization, to make a step ahead, to take responsibility as well, to contribute, to bring ideas. And this is the same that Zhang Ruimin is doing. So building this sort of architecture scaffolding for others to have freedom. So building the minimum viable structure that then creates ample space for individuals to become owners, to become their own CEOs. I guess, again, this is the same role, big responsibility that Chris Raffer and Zhang Ruimin are having. What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. And it's all about allowing that space for individuals to innovate, to provide leadership. You know, we should be building leadership into all of our products and services, and selling leadership to our customers. It's really about allowing people, and we do it through our simple principles. As long as you align with those principles, you're free to be as creative and innovative, and exercise as much leadership as people are willing to give you. So it's very much about opening space, creating space, and holding space for greatness on the part of individuals and on the part of the enterprise itself.
Do you see any other link, any other similarity between what Hire is doing and what Morningstar has been doing? Is there something we have missed?
I, I'm hard pressed to identify the misses. You know, if we engaged in a rigorous bullet point study side by side with the different approaches, I'm sure we would find lots of things that we could compare and contrast. So, you know, at Morningstar, we have business units, about 25 or 26 different business units, each of which has its own P&L. And it's about helping individuals become owners and think like owners, and to not just understand their costs, which they do, but to understand the value that they're creating for their fellow business units and fellow colleagues. So that's supremely important. And we've done education, created a mini MBA program where we had mechanics and clerks and janitors learn financial accounting and cost accounting and contribution margin analysis and return on investment calculations, and enough expertise to start and develop their own small businesses, which some have done. And so it's really, you know, just creating this this platform where people are free to thrive. And you know, if someone were to come up with a great business idea, then I'm quite confident that our founder would allow them to spin it off into an entirely new business and to run that business. That's an opportunity that's available to every single person every day. So I think they're very similar in that respect. And I love the approach that Chairman Jean Ramin has taken with his team. I will say that, you know, I feel very, very close to Hire. I was able to go there in 2012 when they were really ramping up this effort, and to meet with Chairman Jean Ramin and his team and a number of other leaders around the company, and really absorb the story of Hire and share my experience as well. And then Madam Yan Yang came to Morningstar a year or so later, and we gave her a wonderful tour with her entourage, and it was great. And we had a great dialogue and discussion, learning there. I was able to attend their first Rendan Hay conference in 2017, and reported on that for the Huffington Post, or in the Huffington Post. And so I have a great respect for their story and what they've accomplished and what they're planning to accomplish. Chairman Jean came to the U.S. last year, about a year ago, and was able to see him and talk to him briefly when he was here in California. So great story, great alignment with Morningstar and what we're doing here, and hope to continue the dialogue. It's been great so far.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very beneficial dialogue, and something that this kind of bridges that should be built. And of course, there are differences as well, but there are many connections that we would like to stress. I want to ask you a final question. You know, Morningstar, Ayer, and many others have been paving the way to a new way of organizing. And if we look through the lens of these stories, it looks very easy, right? And still we have millions or tens of millions of other organizations, small and big, in China or in US or in Europe, that are real stuck, really struggling to empower people to become more responsive, more agile, more transparent, to build a better connection with the market. So probably it's not that easy. What's your suggestion? What's the starting point? What's really the core initial steps that, let's say, traditional organizations, but organizations that are getting this inflection point should try to make, based on your experience at Morningstar?
Great question. I encourage leaders to use their own personal anxiety to fuel their courage to open up dialogue around what they want to be in the future organizationally. The old days of imposition are fading. I think the new world is going to be a world of invitation and not imposition. But it's going to take some dynamic and visionary and courageous leaders to open up that dialogue and open themselves to it. So what I share with prospective clients is the opportunity for a leadership retreat where we engage in layers and layers of open social technologies, where we open up discussions about what the future should look like or could look like, and where we kind of set aside our fears and our need to control and our need to prescribe, and we listen. Marshall Goldsmith had a great article just, I think, yesterday about the importance of listening on the part of leaders. So let's open up some dialogue, whether we do that through a strategic leadership retreat or some other device. let's start having some open conversations and tapping into the collective intelligence of the network, because we need to start thinking about adaptive organizations that are much more like networks than traditional bureaucratic, brittle command and control hierarchies. Those kinds of structures are too slow. They aren't adaptable. They aren't adapted to the current state of technology, where information moves at light speed, and where so many people are working from home, and there's so much anxiety and social change and all kinds of different attitudes between the generations. We need to really open up this dialogue, and then find some experiments around which we can align, and then measure the results of those experiments and feed the ones that work, kill the ones that don't work, or reconfigure those, and enter into a process of continuous and rapid experimentation that leads to change. I think that's kind of what I'm seeing right now.
Thank you. This very much resonated with my own experience, and I'm hopeful. I see more organizations willing to be vulnerable and to admit they don't know what to do, and the only way ahead is to try, and to do that failing, but at least doing that with your own people, and potentially with this broader community of practitioners, pioneers, and other players that have been trying this for many years. I really thank you for this conversation. Again, really insightful. Morningstar is probably one of the long-standing stories into this space, and it's really, to me, it's really a powerful aid in addressing some of the critics, due to the novelty of the stories, or the industry of the story, or the size. At the end, when you hear the story, you must acknowledge that this is something that many more organizations in every part of the world should start addressing. We'll keep doing this, having this conversation in our next masterclass about the random AE model that will be held by Boundaryless in October. And we'll be doing this also in our other conversations in the EEO Conversations series. So stay with us, and please, let's keep this channel open and this conversation going. Thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you, Emanuele. Enjoyed it immensely, as always. Take care. Thank you.